Eorzea is known for many things. Its vibrant lands, bountiful reserves of ether, and its history alone could fill an entire library. But despite Eorzea being so well known and loved by many cultures over the millennium, it still carries many mysteries. There are some things that the common man never truly understand, and one of those things are the elementals of Gridania. From the outside looking in, they seem like little more than vengeful, spiteful spirits. But anyone who knows their history sees that they are much, much more. Gather around, my friends, for today we will discuss a side to the elementals many don't see, as well as delve into the dungeon known as the Lost City of Amdapor. Our story actually begins more than 1,000 years ago during the height of the 5th Astral Era. This was a time when magic was king and spellcraft was his queen. The greatest civilizations within Eorzea were filled with wizards, witches, and magical creatures on a regular basis. One of, if not the greatest city-state to rule at this time, was Amdapor. From what little we've learned about them, the culture of Amdapor was considered to be the framework of what a society should be. It was a place that rewarded and recognized hard work, while also offering to aid nearby allies whenever they truly needed it. In fact, their civilization was considered so wise that the neighboring nations began calling them the Ancient Amdapor, because their wisdom seemed to be something beyond their natural years. This is where our story truly begins, as mages belonging to the Ancient Amdapor would go out and attempt to commune with the spirits of a small nearby forest. These entities were what we know as the elementals. The Amdapori made offerings and would weave spells to try and appease them, but the elementals weren't won over so easily. Instead, they preferred to maintain a safe distance between themselves and the world of men. However, true to their name, the Ancient Amdapor respected the elementals' desire for privacy and left them alone. They even went so far as declaring that none shall invade this enchanted forest. The only surviving records of the Amdapor entering the small forest was to pursue game that had fled between the trees. Apparently, the elementals weren't too incredibly bothered by this, allowing the hunter to chase their prey before leaving. By all accounts, the elementals and the mages of Amdapor peacefully coexisted, with neither seeking to harm the other. But of course, all of this came to an end when the black mages of Muck began to spread across Eorzea like a ruinous cancer. Where Amdapor preferred peaceful cooperation, the mages of Muck preferred subjugation, and in time, war was all that Muck desired. Amdapor's advanced magical society would create white magic to counter the Maki's black magic, and this brutal conflict would become known as the War of the Magi, a battle that raged on and off for literal centuries. Eventually, the war would drain Eorzea of tremendous amounts of aether, resulting in what would be known as the 6th Umbral Calamity, flooding the world in etheric water. Not even the great and powerful Amdapor were spared from the flooding, as they were forced to abandon their homes and retreat to higher ground. The forest that the elementals lived within was also drowned in the waters as well, and they had been watching the War of the Magi unfold this entire time. Essentially, the concerns the elementals had were proven correct, and they were not at all pleased. Having seen the chaos that the War of the Magi had created, the elementals were fearful of what people would do if they discovered Amdapor's great wealth of power. So, as the flooding of the Umbral Calamity faded away, the Black Shroud would grow, encouraged by the powers of the elementals to cover more of northeast Eorzea. Eventually, the force became so large that it covered the entire abandoned city-state, and with their magic, they glamored everything. With the secrets of the Amdapori mages sealed away, and the white mage soul crystals collected, the elementals let out a sigh of relief. But as we know, this wouldn't be the case forever. The elementals eventually found it within their hearts to start trusting people again, leading to the creation of Gridania and its leaders, the Pajal. They would eventually bestow the White Mage Soul Crystals to the Pajal, allowing some of Amdapor's power and culture to blossom in the 6th Astral Era. But after 1500 years, the elementals bore witness to another calamity as Bahamut would usher in the 7th Umbral Age. Twice now, the elementals have seen what mortal hubris will do in the pursuit of power. But instead of throwing out the Gridanians, the elementals used their considerable might to prevent the Black Shroud from being completely engulfed in Bahamut's flames. This act, combined with the corrupted aether that Bahamut had created, weakened the elementals by a significant margin. As a result, many of the glamours and seals that they had placed within the shroud began to fail. Old, forgotten temples and ruins became visible again, as the ruins of Amdapor could now be observed. However, this also meant that all the dangers that had been sealed within the ruins could now escape. Voidsent that had been sealed away since the War of the Magi were breaking free, and the elementals were too weak to stop them. And to make matters worse, the imbalance brought on by Bahamut's wrath had tainted the Black Shroud as well. Much like how the element of etheric ice was thrown off balance in Kurthus, rendering Ishgard's lands frozen, the element of etheric earth was drained from the Black Shroud, or more specifically, the city-state of Amdapor. The sudden loss of pure earthen energy caused a plague of corrupted mold and fungus to bloom all over Amdapor's ruins. This toxic chaos likely would have spread across the entirety of the Black Shroud, if not all of Eorzea. However, in her wisdom, Seed Seer Raya Osena worked alongside the elementals to create a massive ward that would contain this perverted version of nature. They succeeded, having saved countless lives from the toxic spores. But just because the etheric corruption within Amdapor had been contained, didn't mean that the darkness within the city's walls had stopped stirring. If anything, they were getting worse. The Pajal and elementals knew that they didn't have the strength to contain the corruption and monsters now festering within forever. So, the Pajal would beseech some trusted adventurers to go into the Lost City of Amdapor and slay the threats within. The adventurers agreed to this task and would enter the Lost City. Inside, they found just how horrible the earthen corruption had gotten and how twisted aether had resulted in the spawning of horrible monsters. Not only that, but many Voidsent that had been sealed away were finally breaking free. The white mages that originally captured them were long dead, and their spells hadn't been maintained for more than 1,000 years. Between the toxic spores and the Voidsent, our adventurers had their work cut out for them. But eventually, they did reach the Inner Sanctum, where one of Mok's most deadly Voidsent had been contained. In ages long past, the Void Mages of Mok attempted to use Diablos as a sudden death stroke to Amdapor's heart. He flew through the city with abandon, poised to kill the greatest of their city-state without warning. But even with his sudden appearance, the White Mages captured and contained Diablos with a powerful spell. It was so strong that only now was he finally able to break free. However, his overconfidence and long slumber had left him vulnerable, and our adventurers were able to defeat him all the same. But just because he was beaten didn't mean he was gone. His essence as a Voidsent allowed him to leave and gather power elsewhere. Nevertheless, the Pajal were pleased and grateful that the threats inside Amdapor had been purged. Now the rituals of healing could begin. Eventually, the Pajal and their assistants, the Hearers, would go into the Lost City to cleanse the corrupted plant life. But unfortunately, something was wrong. No sooner had they begun, the elementals that were helping them began to panic. They listened and could hear the elementals warning them that old, unforeseen powers had started to stir within the ruins. By listening to the elementals and their warnings, nothing was truly lost to this new threat. It turns out the void scent roaming freely and the corruption of aether around the forest had finally roused Amdapor's oldest warriors. Arcane golems created during the War of the Magi had started to awaken. Apparently, the golems could not tell the difference between a void scent and an elemental, driving them to attack with reckless abandon. And in this strange new age, just about everyone and everything was an unwelcome intruder. Once more, Gridania would ask the same adventurers for help. The Pajal needed to maintain their wards, and the hearers weren't made for combat. So, trusting the adventurers once again, they were sent into the Lost City. Inside, they had discovered many of Amdapor's old golems have started to reactivate, forcing them to be destroyed. Thankfully, that was the worst of it. So with the void scent cold and the golems destroyed, the last remaining spite from the War of the Magi was laid to rest. The adventurers were praised for their work once more, and thanks to them, the hearers could continue their rituals and steadily bring stability back to the Lost City of Amdapor. Eventually, the city will be purified, and unlike Ishgard, balance will be restored to the etheric elements. But what then? The elementals can't simply hide Amdapor and its knowledge anymore. People can see the city, buildings and ruins of a once mighty arcane civilization. Naturally, the Pajal would consign these ruins to the forest, allowing it to be devoured by the shroud completely, letting the past and all it had simply die. But maybe Gridanians will claim what knowledge is left behind, and with the guidance of the elementals, become a newer and more harmonious version of Amdapor. The magical city-state of Gridania does have a certain ring to it. But regardless, this will take time. Time in which they may or may not change their minds as to what should be done with Amdapor's ruins. But I am curious, what would you do with these ruins and the knowledge of the ancient Amdapor? I hope you ponder this question after seeing a more benevolent side to the elementals today. And until we speak about such things again, stay safe, my friends. Thank you all for watching to the end. If you enjoyed this video, why not subscribe and share this with your fellow adventurers? With your help, I'll try to reach out even further and bring even greater stories to you. Although, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge my biggest contributors. A grand thank you to Anthony Ehrlich, Potato, Sage Mouse, Sinalv Bagel, Sizani, and Tyradox, with an additional nod to the scholarships on screen. Links to things like my Twitter and that of my channel artist Caddy can be found in the description. Thank you all for your viewership as well as your support, and I hope all of you have a wonderful day. Class dismissed.